Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me for our newest town hall. Today's, they've all been important, but today is really important in my mind. We are going to be talking about combating domestic abuse during and after the quarantine, but most importantly, during the quarantine. It's really difficult to reach out for help. If you happen to be quarantined with an abuser. And I'm so very thankful to have Rhonda Hendrickson today. She is the Vice President of Programs for the YWCA of Greater Harrisburg. And I'm so thankful to have you here, Rhonda. Thank you so much.
Well, Patty, thank you so much. We appreciate the invitation, and we certainly agree with you. This is an important topic, and especially during this period of mass isolation of people.
Yeah. And so I don't know if people are aware how long the YWCA has actually been around. Can you just give us a little background on the Harrisburg chapter and kind of what your mission is and what you do there?
Yeah, sure. So our mission is really about eliminating racism and empowering women, but also, empowering children and men. And our services are available to all populations. We really like to say to ourselves that we transform lives. When people ask, where do you work and what do you do? My answer is we really are in the business of transforming lives. And across our organization, we can see 30,000 individuals a year through our various programs and services. So, the YWCA has been around for an extremely long time, but specifically in our conversation today on our domestic violence programs and our sexual assault programs, we've established those programs since I think it was early to mid 1970s. So we have a real long history of providing these services to the community.
Yeah, and it's really a gift, to the community. I don't know that a lot of people are familiar with everything that you do. And it really is a wonderful resource for women and children who find themselves in a situation that they need help getting out of. And I think that probably goes on a lot more than we realize. So let's just start. If somebody is being abused and they're stuck in quarantine at home because of the stay-at-home orders with an abuser, what can they do? What are their options to stay safe?
Sure, and this time that we're in that is so unique, that we haven't experienced before in our lifetimes, is making the issue of domestic violence even more challenging than normally to address. Look at how we're living and working right now. We're isolating ourselves. We're isolating with our families. Businesses are shut down. All those normal social contacts that we have that allow other people to get a glimpse sometimes that a victim may need help have been removed from most people's lives at this point. So if a victim is out there and is experiencing any form of domestic violence, so that could be actual physical violence, it could be emotional and psychological abuse or sexual abuse or economic abuse, and what they can still do, as they always have been able to do, is give our hotline a call if you have the opportunity and can safely do that. Our services still remain open. Our hotline number, I'll put that out there right now, is 800-654-1211. That hotline is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And a trained domestic violence advocate will answer that phone any hour of the day, Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve, when everybody else was, previously out having a great time. We have advocates who are on duty, and they're still on duty during this pandemic. It is a very challenging time because if you're trapped at home with your abuser, can use safely.
Yeah.
Pick up that phone and make the call. We are open at the YWCA in Harrisburg. You can, if you have the ability to safely do it, flee your abusive situation and come to our office. We will find you safe shelter. We do have some shelter beds open. I think that's a really good point I wanted to talk about today is we've never seen that. We don't usually have beds open. We are usually finding places to keep people safe. But in our shelter, we have seen about a 12% decline in usage since this pandemic started back in March here in Pennsylvania. That's scary to us because what it says is victims are having a hard time fleeing that situation.
Mm-hmm.
So what do we do about that?
Yeah.
I encourage everybody to keep connection to their loved ones. Ask people, are you safe? Do you need anything? Are there any indicators? It's going to be much more challenging with this social isolation. So the YWCA is there, and if you can make a hotline call, a call to our hotline, even if you suspect it's happening to a friend or loved one, you give us a call. We can offer you some tips to help have that conversation.
And I read a Facebook post, and of course, Facebook is like, is it true? Is it not true? That there's a code word going around. If you need help, if you're in a dangerous situation, you call the police and you ask to order a pizza. So is any of those things true that people can do to call for help and not have, even if the abuser is standing right next to them, they might not know? Is any of that true?
Well, I certainly think, from situation to situation, looking at what that victim feels like they can safely do. Mm-hmm. If they're picking up the phone to call 911 and they need help right then and there, then certainly, they're going to have to decide for their own safety. What is the best way to handle this?
Right.
I've heard the same things. I've seen, stories of great examples where that has worked for victims. I encourage people to do what they feel is going to be the safest option for them. And we always say this, the victim knows what is best in their circumstance. Yeah. They know if calling the police is actually going to get them killed. They know if, coming to us and seeking a protection from abuse order, which is still available, as well as emergency protection orders. They're all still available. We'll set that abuser off and make him escalate. So we really count on the victims to tell us what is the best option for them. If they call us, I'm going to say, and they, try to order a pizza, mm-hmm. Our advocates may not know what to do with that, essentially, because we're not the police, right? So we aren't going to respond to a home. But what we may do is say, do you need us to call the police for you?
Right.
And then that may trigger it. So again, it really goes back to what the victim feels is going to be safe for them to do.
Okay. And you had mentioned that PFAs are still available, and they're still available even though the courts are basically closed down at the moment?
Right. So the courts are closed in some instances for emergency things such as I need an order, I've been abused, mm-hmm. I'm being abused. We can still help you file that emergency protection from abuse order. The court will still hear that. And they are still hearing temporary orders, and PFA court is happening at times in different ways. So sometimes it's over the phone. We used to be at PFA court every week, and when there's a PFA, we'll be there virtually, just like this.
Okay.
Our attorneys, though, are still working to provide the representation for victims, so we'll be with them from the beginning. They just need to let us know they want to do that. Mm-hmm. I'll help them file. We can provide legal representation through our free civil legal services. And then the supportive services, throughout the process and after from our experienced advocates and counselors.
And so I know that I have, there's all different ways that abusers can kind of control the people that they're abusing, and so that they're afraid to leave. And one of the ways is if there's a family pet in the house, and it people can be afraid to leave the situation and leave the pet behind, because of course that's the only thing left in the house that the abuser can have hold on and control over. So what if someone has a child or someone has a pet that they are too afraid to leave behind, even if it means for their own safety? What can they do? What options are available there?
Sure. So bring the pet with you to the extent that you can do that.
Okay.
We run into challenges because we serve urban areas, suburban areas, and rural areas, and pets differ. So in a rural area we've encountered has horses. But what the answer here is, if you can bring the pet with you, go ahead. We will not house the pet unless it's a service dog or a support animal at the YWCA. But if it is a service dog or a support animal, they are absolutely welcome. But what we can do is help you through our partnering agencies and animal shelters to house that animal until you are settled in a safe location independently. So if you're staying in our shelter, once you leave, we can assist you with getting that animal returned to you. It's kind of like fostering the pet.
Sure.
So there are agencies out there, as well as animal shelters, that will provide a safe haven for the animal.
That's awesome, because that's one less thing that they have to worry about. And I would imagine that your services are really designed so that you take a lot of that weight off of them, so that all they have to think about is getting from step A to B, which is leaving the house and getting to safety. So it's nice to know that they don't have to worry about, how am I going to pay for an attorney? What am I going to do with my dog or my cat? And I would imagine, obviously, that the children can stay with them then, at your location.
Absolutely. And you said that so well. All the victim needs to do is really have a plan for how to leave that house safely. And that's only if there's time to do that. Sometimes victims have to flee in the moment and just take whatever they have in their possession. And oftentimes it's their children and the clothes on their back. And if that's the case, we will provide everything else. We will provide clothing for them. We provide meals for them. We have beds for them. Their children can stay with them. So everything is going to be taken care of. And then our case managers work very diligently. I mean, our staff has been incredibly dedicated and working so hard through this pandemic to make sure that victims are safe and that their needs are taken care of. And we will always do that. Yeah. So whatever that is, we're going to help figure it out with them. They're not alone now after this pandemic. During this pandemic, they're not alone. They just need to be ready to take that first step.
And I guess this would be a good place to kind of mention where you are and what your hours are. If somebody can only manage to flee in the middle of the night when their abuser is asleep, can they find an open door at the YWCA at that time? And, if not, where do they go? What do they do then?
Our door is open 24/7. So if it's 2 in the morning and the abuser is asleep, and that's the best and safest time for you to get out, go. You will be welcomed through our door. We will take care of you. We will find a safe place to shelter you. Even if our shelter is full, we will find a safe place for you, and we will begin working with you immediately on safety planning. What does that look like for you in your unique individual situation?
Mm-hmm.
And we don't just safety plan for the adult, we safety plan for the family, for the whole family, the children as well, and what that will look like and plan for the future.
And there's all kinds of different abuses. You touched on them in the beginning, but I think it's important to kind of double back around. Physical abuse I think is the one most people think of. You know, when they think of domestic abuse, they think of black eyes or broken bones and things like that.
Right.
But domestic abuse has a lot of faces. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it really does have a lot of faces. So the physical abuse is something that comes to mind immediately when we hear that word, domestic violence, and of course that's the bruises and the broken bones and the injuries, and those are often the easiest things for us as bystanders to spot. But there's also many other things, such as the emotional abuse, the demeaning of the victim, the putting them down, making them feel lucky that the abuser would have them. Really hitting that emotional piece. Psychological abuse. You mentioned the animals. So using pets against them. I'll kill the pet, mm-hmm. or I'll take your kids and you will never see them. I will make you look crazy. Yeah. And oftentimes, abusers use drugs and alcohol and pressure their victim to use them and then use that against them. Well, my wife or my husband or my partner is a drug addict and they're not fit to have these children.
Yeah.
And they'll throw that up and they'll use every tactic possible to psychologically hold that victim in place. There's also sexual abuse, of course. We often are seeing now that domestic violence victims are being forced to become victims of human trafficking. So there's a huge intersection between that, and that's another whole discussion.
It is.
And then, of course, there's economic or financial abuse, where an abuser really controls a victim's ability to be self-sufficient. Maybe sabotages her job so she can't work and gets her fired. Or she's only allowed to have an allowance and has to return all the money from the groceries, any change that's left has to be returned with the receipt. So he knows exactly, is she pocketing some money to try to buy a bus ticket to escape? So yeah, definitely lots of different faces, and during isolation, it's going to be really challenging to identify those, but it can be done, and it's a matter of keeping connection with people in your life, whether it's a quick Zoom conversation, FaceTime, we've all become very creative in trying to stay connected. And I think that really is an important message during this time for victims, is to stay connected, and for those of all of us to stay connected to our loved ones.
And it's not, I think generally we think of men as being the abuser, and maybe traditionally there are more men abusers, but I would imagine that women can be abusers as well, that there are some men out there who are victims of domestic abuse too. Can they, if they find themselves in that situation, can they also come to your door and get help? Or
absolutely. Yeah, Patty, absolutely. We serve everybody. Men are absolutely victims of domestic violence. And, there's always a stigma, I think, that's associated with it. And in general, even a female victim. And the perpetrators often try to blame the victim. So it makes it that much harder for somebody to come forward, especially, a man to come forward and say, I've been victimized. But, we have same-sex couples, mm-hmm. and so many individuals out there that are experiencing domestic violence, and our services are open to everybody, regardless of sexual identity or sexual orientation. So the doors are open for everyone to come in and use our services.
And so let's say that I have someone that I'm worried about, or there's just that little whisper in my head that maybe something's wrong, but I have no proof. How can you recognize that from a distance, both inside and outside of quarantine? Because I would imagine that if someone is not ready to leave their abuser, they get pretty creative at hiding the signs or explaining away the signs. So how do you know if they're being abused or they really did fall down the steps? My mom was visiting last year and she literally fell down our steps, and it looked like we beat her up, and we didn't. It was crazy. I've never had that experience, but sometimes those excuses are really honest. So how do you know the difference? How can you reach out and help somebody?
The best thing is to keep those lines of communication open and keep asking the victim if there is anything they need. Are they safe? Do they want to talk? Sometimes, and you said victims become very good at hiding it because they have to. It's sometimes a matter of life and death for them. They know what will set the perpetrator off, but we on the outside looking in can keep contact, keep offering an open door with no judgment whatsoever. Just keep that open for when they're ready to make that disclosure. And when they are, offer them your phone. Let me help you call the hotline, and an advocate can safety plan with you and move you forward from that step on. So, this quarantine has made it really challenging, but I'm just going to keep going back to the same thing I've been saying. Keep that communication open. Ask, are you okay? Are you safe? Is there anything going on that you want to talk about? I'm here to do whatever I can for you. And be non-judgmental. You can't say, look, I know that bruise you got. I know he did that, and why don't you leave? Because all you've done there is blame the victim.
True.
Right? So we don't ever ask that question. And the whole country needs to reframe that question. And we get it all the time. Why don't they leave? Why don't they leave? The question is, why does the abuser abuse?
Right.
Right. So
yeah.
And I can certainly answer that question, why victims don't leave. I mean, there's so many, many, many reasons, from fear and intimidation, to the shame and the guilt and the economic resources, and where will I live? What will I do? How will I support myself? And will I see my children? Will he take them?
Yeah.
There's just so many moving pieces for a victim to deal with on top of her own trauma.
Yeah. And I know sometimes people have a desire to fix things, and so I think there's probably a temptation to say, I'm done waiting for this victim, to reach out and ask for help, because they may not live to see that day when they have that ability to take that step. So I'm just going to call the police. I'm just going to do this for them. Is that a safe option? Should people do that, or is that really putting them in even more harm's way to take that step?
Yeah, that can definitely be putting them in harm's way if they haven't asked you to do that for them, or you haven't set up, look, if you don't hear from me and my porch light is on at 2 a.m, that's my sign that you need to call the police for me. Otherwise, you can be putting a victim in more danger, because the police are going to show up at the house.
Right.
He's going to ask some questions. And then the perpetrator is going to blame that victim. How does she know to ask or to call the police? What are you telling people? So, we understand people have the best intention.
Yeah.
And just so want to offer that help. The best help you can offer in those circumstances that aren't, there's an immediate crisis, obviously, is to communicate, keep the lines open, let the victim tell their story when they're ready, and just keep letting them know that you will always be ready to hear that and offer assistance.
Yeah, and I think in my opinion, or my guesstimation, it's not a good idea to try to make them feel guilty for not leaving. You know, if, especially if there's a child in the house, it's probably not the best choice to say, you know, you're putting your child in harm's way because you don't have the courage, or, you know, this and that. I think there's definitely more damage than that you could do to somebody in that situation. So it's, like you said, it's best just to trust that they know what's best for the situation, because I would imagine there's so many triggers for an abuser that causes the situation. You know, obviously it's never the victim's fault, but I would imagine there's triggers that cause an abuser to you know, get violent or lash out. So you, as an outsider, you don't really know what those triggers are, and you could accidentally be pushing them without your knowledge, and like you said, making the situation worse.
Yeah, and that is certainly possible. And you know, it's really all about power and control for the perpetrator. Um, when a victim is ready to tell, to ask for help, and you have already said to her, you know, why don't you leave? Do you know what you're doing to your children by staying? You're endangering them. You're closing the door to that victim. She, you know, are they really going to reach out and then tell you their story and ask for help if you sort of been one of those people who have blamed them and demeaned them and their judgment on how best they're keeping their children and their family safe at that point?
Yeah. And I think sometimes people can be worried about, well, I made it out of the house, I made it to safety, I have the PFA, but how good is that? You know, really, how protected am I in this situation? You know, can they still get to me? Am I still in danger? Will it be worse if they find me outside? You know, so what do you say to those people who are kind of worried that it may actually get worse once they leave? What protections are in place for them to prevent that, or put their mind at ease?
And all really valid questions that a victim sort of asks herself as she's walking down this path of, you know, how do I move towards a life free of violence? And again, the victim, the survivor, knows best what the reaction of that perpetrator is going to be. And if she says to us, look, if I get a PFA, he will come kill me, we believe her or him.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to think about then what other options should we use. Maybe it's just you leave and come to shelter. We have relocation programs, address confidentiality programs that can be put in place to help shield that victim. Working with an advocate to work out what those safety plans look like. But what we do know is that one of the most dangerous times for a victim is when they do leave, because at that point, the perpetrator has lost all control of the victim. And that is where we see, deadly incidents occur. So the questions are very valid. A PFA is a protection order. It's a valid tool to use, but it's one tool among many. And that's why working with your domestic violence program in your area is really, really important to make a real comprehensive safety plan.
Yeah, and I'm sure, I'm positive that you probably have seen almost everything in all the years that you've been there, and you can kind of anticipate if a victim comes to me and says this, then we can do that. And if they say this, then we can do that. I'm sure, it's not one size fits all, and you do have a lot of options to kind of fine tune it for each person to have the best success rate.
That's true. Every case is unique. And while if we do sometimes feel like we've seen everything possible, we haven't.
Yeah.
But we work very closely with the other counties across Pennsylvania. So we're a large network, but a close network of domestic violence centers across Pennsylvania. And, we all work together to figure out solutions for victims, especially if staying here, let's say they're in Dauphin County, is not a good option for that victim, and they're okay with leaving the county. So we'll work together. I always say the more ideas that you can throw into the pool, the better solutions you can pick out.
Right.
But when I say that, I also want to make sure that for survivors and for victims who are out there listening to this, you are 100% protected by statutory confidentiality, which means we will never release your identity, your information, your whereabouts, anything that says you've ever come to us without your written consent, period. The exception would be if you were going to commit a crime or child abuse or
Right.
some of the things that as mandated reporters that we would be required by law to address. But you are protected by a state law that says as a domestic violence program, we cannot talk about the fact that you're using our services, that you're staying at our shelter. A police officer can drop you off one night and come back to talk to you the next day. And if you didn't give us a written release that says I can talk to Officer Smith, we're going to tell Officer Smith, I'm sorry, I can't confirm or deny that she's here.
Yeah.
And that's how safe, we try to make it. So, yeah.
And I think a good way to kind of end is that we want to make sure that everybody who's being abused understands that they don't deserve it. Regardless of what you're being told, it's not your fault, and you deserve better. You deserve to be happy. You deserve to be loved. You deserve to be safe. And if you are not any of those or all of those things, reach out to somebody, because you deserve to have them all, and you can have them all. There's somebody out there who will give you those things. And if you feel trapped, it's something that you can reach out and get help for. It's not something that you're stuck in for the rest of your life, and it's incredibly scary, I'm sure, to reach out for help and take that step. But if you can kind of just imagine what your life could be like if you weren't in this situation, maybe that would help kind of push you in that direction. Do you have any tips for people who are in that situation to kind of, I don't want to say encourage them to go, but just kind of where they can find their inner strength to make the best decisions for themselves and their family?
Yeah, I think you said it so well, Patty. You're not alone. If you are experiencing abuse, you are not alone. There is help available, and that help will lead you down a path of healing and an ability to have a life free of violence. So give us a call when it's safe. If you have to flee, our doors are open, and we are here to provide that help and support to you.
And where can they find you? So what is your address? And let's do the telephone number again. And of course, I'll put that in the comments below the video. I'll put all the links in. But for anybody who's listening right this moment who would like to have that information, could you give that to them, please? And the website?
Sure. So our hotline number, which is available 24/7, is 1-800-654-1211. Our address of our business office is where you would come if you needed to access services and you didn't pick up the hotline, would be 1101 Market Street in Harrisburg. And our website is www.ywcahbg.org.
And what if somebody is watching this who lives in Pittsburgh or who lives in Somerset County, who obviously can't drive to Harrisburg to knock on your door? What's the best place for them to find a local resource just like you where they live?
Yeah, so every county will have a designated domestic violence program. If you don't know what that is, jump online, jump on your smartphone, and Google the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And they have a map on there that will lead you to your program. Or they also have a phone number that you can call to find out what that is. And I'm sorry, I don't have that phone number with me here at the house right now.
I'll put it in the comments.
Yeah, there's also a national domestic violence hotline that you can call too, and they will link you up with your closest program, regardless of if you're in California or in Pennsylvania.
Okay, perfect. I'll have all that in the comments so people can have a resource if they need it. And thank you so much. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for everything that you do. It's sad that we need you, to be honest, but I'm super thankful that you're there for the people who do. And I hope that this encourages people to, you know, kind of get out of their situation and move on to better times, because it is possible. So.
Thank you, Patty. We appreciate the awareness that you're raising with this and really helping reach victims during this really scary time in our history.
And I did have one question just popped in my head. If somebody wants to volunteer for you, do you take volunteers for the YWCA? If anybody wants to help in any way, whether they want to donate money or donate time, what options do they have?
Yeah, we take volunteers. We actually have a very robust volunteer program that requires some training. But there are lots of different types of volunteering you can do. Call the hotline number. If you want to help from home, we are accepting donations of cloth masks at this time, because you know our advocates are still on the front lines, as well as our attorneys, working with clients every day, and we want to make sure that they are safe and that the clients who come in to see us are safe from COVID and from everything else, of course. But that's one thing they could do at home to assist us as well.
Okay, perfect. We don't want to forget that part, because that's important too. And Brad, did we have any questions on Facebook that we haven't covered?
We had one that said, "What can we do to help?" So that's been answered very, very thoroughly. Thank you so much, Rhonda.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. And everybody, once we get the official recording, which will be probably about 5 minutes up on Facebook, then we'll have all the links there to everything we talked about, so that you can reach out, know where to go for help and where to go to volunteer. So thank you so much, Rhonda.
Thanks.